These maps show different cities in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK. Some you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. But what all these cities have in common is a unified doctrine for urban planning. An invisible set of rules which govern how these cities are laid out, where new buildings and developments go, and where public centres are constructed. This video would not be possible without the support of my patrons on Patreon. Please check it out, link in the description. The DPRK was left all but entirely destroyed after the Korean War, which saw indiscriminate bombing flatten most of the country's major cities. As a result, planners were forced to start from scratch, often only using the old city layout as a rough guide for the post-war, increasingly socialist-oriented city plan. In short, there are a few basic principles which come up time and time again across the DPRK's major cities. Number 1 we'll call socialist planning. Residential districts are generally divided into small neighbourhoods, or micro-districts, known as 주택 소구역, which literally means housing subdivision. These micro-districts are made up of residential buildings and their supporting amenities, such as shops, schools, kindergartens, public spaces, and other civic offices. One of the key aspects here is both the equality of the residential buildings and the encouragement of people to spend more time in the community, hence the focus on parks and playgrounds, something we'll return to later. Number 2 is axes and boulevards. Statues, monuments, and major public buildings form natural centres in DPRK cities, often symbolically linked together along major tree-lined roadways or along geographical axes, allowing clear lines of sight between significant buildings. Other major buildings will also be placed along these arterial roads. Often, these are places people visit less frequently compared to their local shops and schools. And so this could include hospitals, stadiums, cultural and/or children's palaces, museums, and similar amenities. These arterial roads will often also include bus routes, tram tracks, or metro stations. Number 3 is public spaces. Public parks, squares, and green areas are an important factor in city planning, once again encouraging locals to spend more time in the community rather than at home. Almost all cities in the DPRK will have one primary central square, often the site of a monument to the leadership, a revolutionary museum, and other significant buildings, either political or cultural. Finally, number 4 is limited urban sprawl. New developments in cities in the DPRK tend to take the place of older areas of the city, rather than building large developments further out, thus protecting against infinitely sprawling cities which expand endlessly into the surrounding countryside. As an example, we'll be looking at 4 cities in this video. Kaesong, an example of an ancient city which survived the destruction of the 1950s. Sinuiju, a border city on the Amnok River, the border with China. Kanggye, the capital of Chagang province and one of the only major cities to be set deep amidst mountains. And Chongjin, an industrial city on the coast. The best place to start is one of the ways these cities protect against urban sprawl, splitting themselves into different divisions, specifying whether an area is rural or urban. So, let's take a quick look at the DPRK's National Administrative Divisions. The country is divided into 9 provinces, along with 4 separate special city regions which are governed independently. I won't get too far into this now, but if you want to find out the difference between a directly governed city and a special city, I've actually done a 2-part video on the DPRK's provinces, so go check that out after this. Each province has a handful of designated city districts, or shi, with the rest of the region being divided into counties, or gun. Across the country, you'll find the lower lying areas are home to the most people. For example, South Pyongyang has 5 cities, whereas all other provinces have either 2 or 3. These cities are split further. Larger cities such as Pyongyang, Kaesong or Chongjin will be split into guyok, or wards. However, most cities are divided into the urban districts known as dong, or neighbourhood, and countryside areas designated as villages, or ri. Outside the cities, the gun are administered in 3 categories: ri, nodongjagu, and up. Ri we've already dealt with. As with cities, these villages are administrative regions comprising of low population countryside areas. Up is often translated as town, the name given to smaller built-up population centres. Often there will be 1 or 2 towns in a county, serving as the administrative and social centre for the area. The final category is nodongjagu, or workers' districts. These are also classified as urban areas, which may be centred around various or specific industries. Each of these divisions is accountable to the division above it, so the villages, towns and workers' districts across the DPRK are accountable to their county. Neighbourhoods and city districts are accountable to their city's local committees, and those groups in turn are administered by the province. As noted previously, we're going to look at 4 cities. Kaesong, a special city near the inter-Korean DMZ, made up of 24 dong and 2 ri. Sinuiju, a city on the northern border with China and de facto gatehouse of the Republic, made up of 49 dong and 9 ri. Chongjin, the capital of North Hamgyong province, founded on the country's northeastern seaboard, known as the City of Iron, made up of 7 guyok. And Kanggye, a rarely discussed city in the mountains of northern Korea, and capital of Chagang province, made up of 34 dong and 2 ri. I'll be focusing on these cities because they each represent different challenges and opportunities for city planners. Kaesong, for example, survived the bombardment of the country during the Korean War and remains largely as it was pre-1950. So planners have had to build around the existing so-called old city. Chongjin is a coastal city and has served as a major port on the East Sea for over a century, latterly becoming a centre for heavy industry. Sinuiju is a border city, which today facilitates much of the DPRK's overland trade, and has served as the gateway to the country since the days of the Joseon dynasty. And Kanggye is one of a handful of major cities which exists in the middle of a mountain range, which dominates much of the northern part of the DPRK. And so planners have had to work around the restrictions that come with building a city in a valley. Starting with Kaesong, given the city plan is somewhat based on the old dynastic era city layout, it's best to start with this map of the pre-war city. As you can see, the original city plan was focused around this central crossroad, home to the historic Namdaemun, or South Gate. It's notable how the old plan lacks many of the characteristics of socialist city planning, as one would expect, with an ancient city growing and sprawling out naturally. Most importantly, there's no major central square or meeting place. This area in the centre is Janamsan, or Janam Hill, and these red circles over here denote schools and other educational institutions. If we switch to the modern map, you'll see the original highways now intersect with a new major roadway running from the main Pyongyang-Kaesong motorway up to the city centre. The focal point has shifted from Namdaemun to Janam Hill, which now hosts statues of the president and general, forming a large axis between the statues and the motorway, creating a sense of monumentality for any visitors to Kaesong. The area down here, once dominated by schools, has been reappropriated, with the buildings either replaced or now occupied by modern universities, the Children's Palace, and the Kaesong Palace of Culture, all surrounding a new city centre square. Aside from these new important developments, we can see much of the city remains as it was prior to the war, with ancient cobbled streets and traditional Korean buildings, with focal point buildings such as the railway station and Palace of Culture being added along roads which have existed for centuries. Overall, Kaesong has managed to largely keep its pre-war aesthetic, whilst also being updated for the socialist era. The themes of monumental focal points, large boulevards, public spaces, and limited sprawl are all being respected, but without removing the unique touches which make Kaesong special. In the far northeast, the industrial city of Chongjin has earned the name City of Iron for its heavy industry. Looking back at a map of the city before the war, we can see that most of the flat land around the river mouth was part of the industrial city, with ironworks, factories, and marine product facilities. The coastal area was dominated by the large ironworks and the Ohang fishing harbour, with almost the entire residential part of the city situated in the hills to the north over here in this much denser area, home to much of the city's population, as well as the railway station, schools and markets. Chongjin was a major target during the Korean conflict due to its importance to the DPRK's industrial capacity, meaning much of the central part of the city was targeted, whilst the residential areas, shielded by mountains, were left relatively unscathed. We can see this when we switch to the modern map. It's clear that the old street layout still exists in this suburban part of Chongjin. However, the great change comes when we look at the old industrial district. A large swath of the industrial region, and part of the old ironworks, has been replaced by a large boulevard, leading from the coast up to a large city square, centred around the statues of the great leaders. This creates an incredible unbroken axis between the East Sea and the heart of the city, which is also home to other important buildings and facilities. The network of roads run between key buildings in Chongjin, with the main east-west highway running from far outside the central city, through the main square, passing important buildings on the way, to end at a central public square between the North Hamgyong People's Committee, the Provincial Theatre, and the Chonggam Revolutionary Site. On a broader scale, the industrial area has not disappeared, instead mostly moving southwest. A new harbour has also been created for goods being moved in and out of the industrial region, and the original fishing port has become a shipbuilding yard. On the other side of the bay, the Chongjin East Harbour has become home to many DPRK fishermen, who head out into the East Sea each day to ply their trade. Most importantly, just behind the city's central square sits the vitally important Children's Traffic Park. This map, from 1913, shows that the city of Sinuiju, on the northern border with China, was almost entirely focused around the railway station, with one main diagonal avenue linking it to the railway yard and the port. This would make sense, as Sinuiju's role has long been focused on international trade. Again, this made it a significant target for attack. Switching to the modern map, we can see just how much the city has expanded since 1913. The city differs from other cities in the country, as it almost has two main perpendicular axes. The first leads in on the main road into Sinuiju, passing by a series of monuments and public parks, before reaching the large square in front of the railway station, home to the customary statues of the President and the General, standing in front of the North Pyongyang Revolutionary Museum, From here, the second major axis runs between the railway station square and the city centre square, home to the Palace of Culture, City Centre Library, and the Provincial Fine Arts Museum. Much of the rest of the city is split into the characteristic micro-districts, with major buildings and parks peppered across the city. One of the most important public spaces in all of Sinuiju is, of course, the Children's Traffic Park, this time nestled just behind the Palace of Culture. We've talked a lot about wide boulevards, monumental design and city axes. But Kanggye is unique in that the environment means it's tricky to create large, flat, open areas. However, these limitations have created what is, in my opinion, one of the country's most beautiful cities. One could say, instead of being based on large roadways, Kanggye is built around waterways, set on the confluence of two rivers. Kanggye is a city of bridges and mountains. The terrain dictates that much of Kanggye must be built near the rivers, which has called for more radical planning decisions. For example, the city railway station is nestled in a quieter part of town, rather than in the city centre. The railway line meanders along the quiet riverbanks north of Kanggye, before eventually turning into the city. Despite this more relaxed part of Kanggye, there is still a quiet public park and square out of the front of the station. Further down the river, one of the city's major bridges takes you into the centre of Kanggye. The statues of the leadership stand at the corner of the two rivers, in front of the Revolutionary Museum and opposite the Kanggye Children's Palace. Nearby the statues is another major square, in front of the provincial government offices. The rest of the city is split into micro-districts and suburban housing. However, much of the riverside area is dominated by public spaces and parks, including the true heart of the city, the Children's Traffic Park. Actually, quickly, I just need to address the traffic park thing. It's not that they're particularly important parts of a city in Korea, nor are they everywhere. They're actually a great idea and used to teach kids public road safety and stuff. It just seems that they're so prevalent across the country and often located in quite central, prominent locations that if you had to ask me what was the defining feature of a downtown DPRK city, a children's traffic park would be on the list. Anyway, I'll let myself finish the video. We couldn't go through this whole video without discussing Pyongyang. So before we wrap up, let's talk about how Pyongyang has developed in recent years, how the capital has stuck with the original city planning strategy, and how it's built on it. Recent years have seen new districts entirely redeveloped. In order to prevent urban sprawl, many of these new regions have been built right in the heart of the capital. Changjon Street in 2012, Mireille Future Scientist Street in 2015, and Yeomyong Street in 2017. These new developments are notable for their distinct architecture, their towering condominiums, and an evolution in architectural style. Perhaps it's indicative of this new era of city development that these streets were named Mireille and Yeomyong, meaning future and dawn. The street-by-street development strategy has continued, with the construction of Songhua Street in 2022 and Hwasong Street in 2023, part of the effort to construct 10,000 new homes in Pyongyang every year. This strategy of development isn't new, whether it's Songhua Street in the 2020s or Kwangbok Street in the 1980s. For the last 80 years, the DPRK hasn't stopped planning and constructing its cities around these few core tenets of socialist city planning. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this slightly longer deep dive into some of the DPRK's cities and how the layout and architecture can have a massive effect on the feel of a place, and how the country has stuck to a few core ideas, which are actually evident in a lot of cities around the world. If you want to support the work I do here on the channel, please check out my Patreon linked in the description and consider donating to support the videos I'm working on in the future. It really allows me to devote more time to DPRK Explained and come up with new and interesting topics to make videos on. As always, if you enjoyed the music in this video, take a look at my DPRK Explained music channel and subscribe and like and everything. That's where I upload all the Korean music I use while making these videos, so there will be a playlist for this video specifically up on that channel by the time you watch this. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.